Good evening. As we wind up the International Women's Month, tonight we're going to be talking about the strides that we have made as a country in trying to address so many issues that affect the feminine gender. I'm Catherine Munyoki. Tonight on the program, we are joined by the Chief Executive Officer of the Zimbabwe Gender Commission, Mrs. Virginia Mwanigwa. Mrs. Mwanigwa, welcome to the program.
Good evening, thank you.
I know that the theme for this year was Accelerate Action. And I'm sure by the time we end the program, people will have made up their minds whether the action has been accelerated or not.
Okay.
And what is that we need to do to accelerate the action. First thing first, Mrs. Mwanigwa, there's been this, push, to sensitize the global leadership about the importance of achieving gender parity. I'm deliberately saying the global leadership. I don't want it to appear as if it's just a Zimbabwean issue, but it's a global issue. But coming back home, as Zimbabwe, how are we doing in terms of realizing that gender parity?
As a country, Zimbabwe is doing well in terms of having a progressive constitution that upholds the principles of gender equality, that outlaws discrimination, that also recognizes the need for gender balance, that also even speaks about the issue of diversity. I think the challenge that we have is really accelerating the implementation. And we have done well in terms of now having women being represented in key positions in the country, where Prosecutor General, for example, is now a woman. The Attorney General is a woman. And then we've got women holding key positions, like the President of Senate is a woman. And this comes out of our laws, out of the legislative framework. But I noted on Monday, when we were doing the evaluation of performance for public officials, and where we were standing there, or we were in the tent waiting to actually hear the outcome of the evaluations. What disappointed me that particular day was to notice that we have focused, yes, a lot in terms of gender balance, parity, in like top decision-making positions, but then did not really go down to look at other levels of decision-making. Because when we look at the evaluations, these were evaluations of public officials. So ministers and their secretaries, chairpersons of councils and the CEOs of councils, representatives from boards, so chairpersons of boards, and then the secretaries to those boards. And I was very shocked, okay, not shocked really, because we know that it is like that, but I didn't realize the extreme differences that we have, where I just did an exercise, counted numbers, counted people in the queue where I was standing. And we were looking at, like, for every 20 men, there was one woman.
Yay.
And that tells you that, yes, at the top, it's looking not perfect, because the benchmark that the Constitution sets for us is 50%. And we are not yet there, for even at that top level. But now at this level, I realize that we have a lot of work to focus not just at the top, but to really go down to all levels of decision-making, especially within the public institutions.
Which brings me to this question, because we are talking about a progressive constitution.
Yeah.
As the Zimbabwe Gender Commission, are you empowered by the law to make sure that there's this acceleration of action, not only in public bodies, but also even in the private sector?
Yes, because we are a constitutional body, which constitutional body has has 6 objectives, one of which is to hold to account public institutions for mainstreaming gender, and also to ensure constitutionalism, meaning whatever provisions we actually have in our constitution that speak to gender equality, non-discrimination, gender balance, these should actually be happening in reality. So we are empowered at law. I think the challenge with social transformation is then when you are talking about having gender parity, having gender balance, the reality of it is at the level of practice, it's somebody being replaced. So once it is like that, you find that there's resistance, because at the end of the day, those that are in positions of decision making right now, the men particularly, just from the example I've given, will not be very willing to actually think that they will be replaced by women. But the Constitution is very clear that we all equal at law. And in Section 2 of our Constitution, it actually says that we need to, it outlaws any law, custom, or practice that is ultra vires the Constitution. So if the Constitution says we should be having gender balance, that's what should be happening in practice. And so as a commission, we are empowered to the extent that we can make recommendations. So we'll make recommendations if it's an issue of maybe a law that is not strong enough or that is not being implemented, then we can make recommendations, particularly to Parliament, because we report to Parliament to ensure that there is some change to it. I think the challenge is really in practice when it gets down to the people, to the institutions, because institutions are run by people. So if we're talking about issues of boards, for example, when boards are being set up, if institutions recognize that the term of office of the current boards is coming to an end, one of the things that they need to be very aware of is in actually looking around for potential other people to sit on those boards, there has to be gender balance. So this is a challenge, because when we then talk about it, people will say, where are the women? But we know the women are there. Remember, as a country, we are touted as having been very good in ensuring education. And our education has been for both girls and boys. So if there were both girls and boys that were educated, how do we then say we don't have the women?
That's a good question.
Yeah, the other argument is that, okay, the women are not experienced. But how do they get experienced if they're not exposed?
Let's talk more about that in the second segment.
Okay.
That for you to look at someone's capabilities, therefore to give them something to work on.
Yeah.
Please join us in the second segment as we are discussing progress or slightly lack of it insofar as the gender transformation in Zimbabwe is concerned. And we are joined on this program tonight by the CEO of the Zimbabwe Gender Commission, Mrs. Virginia Mwanigwa. Welcome back. If you've just joined us this week on the program, we are in discussion with the CEO of the Zimbabwe Gender Commission, Mrs. Virginia Mwanigwa. We are discussing about Zimbabwe's progress in pushing for the transformation of the feminine gender. I know that as guys, there's a lot that you can talk about, and it is apparent that there's been a lot that we have done at the expense of the feminine gender. Mrs. Mwanigwa, before we went to the break, we were talking about the issue of saying that, we've got to realize, for example, particularly when we are looking at the issues of setting up, decision-making bodies and representation. But we also need to look at the feminine gender and give them an opportunity, not to say where are the women, without having to look at them and thrust them in those positions to see how they can perform. So, do you think that, in the last couple of years, our society, particularly within the corporate world, has been able to look at this differently and say we begin to give the feminine gender an opportunity to lead?
Yeah. I think a good thing is that now no institution can get away with totally ignoring representation of women and men, and even aspirations towards equal representation. Because one of the things we've done very well as a country and even globally is to really put the message out there that, it's not doing anyone a favor to ensure equal representation, but it is what is right. It is what is morally right, because we all of us are able to actually work for our country, to work for the different institutions. But that opportunity needs to be there. You were talking about transforming the feminine gender, but the transformation is for both. Because even as institutions like Gender Commission, the Ministry of Women Affairs, the women's organizations, all others that have been working towards gender equality and women empowerment, have been empowering women to be able to stand up and demand that you also be considered. We need to also ensure that the men, when the women stand up and request to be considered, the space is there for them to be considered. The Constitution has made the space available. Our laws have made the space available. I remember even in terms of when you look at, if you are a private institution and you're talking about, we know that the issue is the issue of profits. Are we going to be guaranteed? You are guaranteed that you will make more profits if you're actually going to have diversity on the representation of your leadership and management. Because we actually have researches that have shown that boards that are more diverse actually do well, because you have a better exchange of ideas, because in any institution you need to have different ideas of how to tackle emerging problems and how to position yourself strategically. So definitely the issue of representation needs transformation by both men and by both women. But at the end of the day, for us, it's not even a choice, because the Constitution demands that you ensure that it is there. At least for public entities, we do what we call advisory notes, where if we understand that there is a board that is to be appointed, and then we find that the numbers are not adding up to what we have promised in the Constitution, we then engage with the institutions just to remind them of what the Constitution says. We also try and be proactive, because we do recognize that by the time it hits the media that this board is to be appointed or has been appointed, it's a bit late. So we need to also be proactive as an institution. And that can only happen when we are engaging with institutions. They are talking to us, we are talking to them. But this is a good opportunity you've given us just to remind everyone that according to the Constitution, the issue of having gender parity is not an option. The lawyers will say it's mandatory, it's peremptory, because it says there must be gender balance.
Sure.
So we need to actually ensure that. And it's not just for the sake. There's also a belief that when we talk about affirmative action, and our Constitution also speaks about needing affirmative action for previously disadvantaged groups.
Which brings me to the very critical issue. In July 2023, the government passed, the Criminal Law Codification Reform Act, which was an amendment to it. And a lot of people, they focused on what they called the Patriotic Act. It's one.
It
one
was
whole,
in the same.
Yeah, it's in the same. Where they looked at the issues of sexual offences.
Yeah.
And try in a bid to try and protect the rights of the young girls.
Yeah.
Do you believe that currently what is set out in the law can mitigate the worsening cases of sexual offences against young girls?
In terms of the law, and you know that with any written instrument, it's when you start to use it, to practice it, that you then find maybe there's a gap. But our key challenge as a country is not so much the content of our instruments, our policies. Yes, there is some work that could always be done to make them better. But the main challenge is how people then actually welcome that and use it. So like for institutions like us as a commission, this is why we are there, to ensure that we lessen the gap between what the content says and what is happening. So yes, now at least we know when we talk about issues of child marriages or so-called child marriages, because in the commission we don't even want to sanitize them and call them marriages. They're not marriages. It is abuse of children. So you find that now people are relatively aware that if you're marrying off somebody who's under 18, you are participating in a process of that marriage, so-called marriage, or you are actually the ones that are receiving the proceeds of that marriage, then you're actually criminally liable. So that is well known. What we then find now is, in terms of some of the information we receive as a commission, is that some people are avoiding the actual marriage. So now it's a liaison, some kind of liaison. But we're also happy that the new law outlaws even that, because anything, any sexual offenses or sexual exploitation or abuse of young people and children is actually criminally liable at law.
Let's talk more about that in the final segment, because it's really a critical issue. Please join us in the final segment as we wrap up this week's program, where we have been in discussion with the CEO of the Zimbabwe Gender Commission, Mrs. Virginia Mwanigwa. Welcome if you're just joining us for the first time. We've been discussing issues to do with transforming the feminine gender in Zimbabwe, and also recognizing their rights and sensitizing even the males about the importance of coexisting and sharing responsibilities with women. And with us tonight is the CEO of the Zimbabwe Gender Commission, Mrs. Virginia Mwanigwa. As we were wrapping up the second segment, we're talking about what the law spells in terms of making sure that it protects the rights of girls. And we're talking about most of the things that it is actually the new law, what it is outlawed.
Yeah.
People have been asking, the Zimbabwe Gender Commission has carried extensive work, particularly investigations in cases of sexual abuse, in cases of sexual harassment.
Yeah.
And people want to know where you stand, particularly in some of the cases where prominent people have been involved. Where do you stand? Are you frustrated? And by what?
Yeah, like I said in the last segment, I think our frustration as a commission is the fact that the laws are very progressive, or are progressive, but we are not playing catch up in terms of practice. We carried out an inquiry, a national inquiry, 2021 and 2022, where we're looking at the sexual exploitation and abuse of young children, including those that are in child marriages. And we're also looking at young children with disabilities. And what we then found is a lot of challenges remaining in terms of, in some cases, knowledge of the laws, but a lot of the cases, the excuse that our culture allows it. So in some sections of our society, they would then justify by saying our culture allows it. But we're also happy to find out, as part of that inquiry, that even some cultural gatekeepers are now also part of the messaging to saying no to child marriages, because you find in some areas where child marriages are quite high, like March Central, like Masvingo, we actually now have chiefs coming together, coming up with what they're calling bylaws to actually outlaw child marriages. So yes, we are making progress, but for us at the Gender Commission, any one person whose rights are violated is not right, because we need to ensure that, as per our Section 52 in the Constitution, the right to personal security is guaranteed, and the bodily integrity, especially of children, or the bodily integrity of young people and children, is to be guaranteed. Because when earlier we were talking about issues of representation in decision making, how are they going to be represented in decision making if we're bringing them to be wives, to be minor mothers? It means that's where they're actually going to end. So for us as a commission, we are happy that we at least have a legislative framework that creates a commission, that also creates even other parts of the national gender machinery. And then our challenge now is to ensure that we are working, really accelerating action to ensure that the protection that the Constitution guarantees is actually a reality for the men, for the women, for the boys and the girls in Zimbabwe. So it's social transformation. We do get that. I'm a social scientist by qualification, and we do get that social transformation does not happen overnight. It's a process. But we just need to be able to really start to see gains, more gains than losses. Because sometimes, like in issues of representation, you move, you really score, you start to see the statistics showing you that we're going up. And then something happens and then we lose and we have to start again. And then even when we talk about the issues of protection of children, we do move where we now see that there is awareness. But for one reason or another, people that actually should know better still engage in practices that are outlawed.
Which brings me to the issue of the infrastructure. Do you have the infrastructure, or does the law empower you to set up infrastructure where you make a follow-up on these minors that would have gone into marriages early?
Yeah.
Where they are violated, impregnated, and then the man disappears. And also the victims of gender-based violence.
As an institution, we don't implement. The implementation we do is awareness raising on what the Constitution says. But we work with other members of the National Gender Machinery that I was talking about. And these include the Ministry of Women Affairs, which coordinates some of the work around providing shelters, the question you're asking about where there is need for protection if somebody has been a survivor of violence of one form or the other. They've been setting up shelters. There are also women's rights organizations that are also setting up shelters. And at some point, we also come together in terms of just raising information, raising awareness among our people of what is supposed to be happening. We also have the victim-friendly unit from the ZRP, whose role is to actually deal with those cases when they are reported. They follow them up, they protect, they take the survivors out of that situation if that is necessary. And they also ensure that they start a legal process for punishment of perpetrators. We also have now we have the Independent Complaints Commission, which is there to assist in issues of when there is that, the issues of sexual exploitation. It's also an option. If somebody finds that that has happened to them, they can actually report those issues. And then we, as a commission, we are also there to receive different issues or different complaints. And then we also are part of a referral pathway, a national referral pathway, where we work not just with the women's rights organizations, so that I correct that impression, because we also have male-led institutions that are working around issues of gender equality. So we have Padare, we have Fathers Against Abuse. All those are institutions that we work with as a referral pathway to addressing issues of violence against women, issues of violence against girls, and also any other issues that we feel from a gender perspective are issues that are contrary to what our Constitution says.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Mrs.
you.
Mwaniga, for having made time to be with us.
Okay.
I'm sure we're going to be discussing more in future, because the nation really, they would want to know, the results of the inquiries that we have made, particularly with regards to sexual exploitation.
Yeah.
Because it is a big issue.
Yeah.
Although at times people say, it is exaggerated.
Yeah.
But that'll be for another day.
But maybe just to also take advantage of being here to announce that we have gazetted, that we are starting an inquiry into possible sexual harassment within our tertiary institutions. Because from inception as a commission, a lot of complaints we've also dealt with have been coming from that particular sector. So this will be our second national inquiry, to be able to really dive deep into the issues and understand what's happening, so that we're able to also make the necessary recommendations.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It is time to accelerate action all round, not just looking at a particular constituency. Until next week, same place, same time, same presenter. Good night.